Despite tending to keep to the shadows and often being fashionably late to join rosters, Akuma stands as one of the most beloved characters in all of Street Fighter canon. He's proven to rival even the likes of Ryu and Chun-Li in popularity and has appeared in almost as many Street Fighter entries and crossovers as Ryu. We'd be surprised at this point not to see Akuma in a Street Fighter entry and fully expect Capcom to use him once again in Street Fighter 6. While we wait, let's take a look at the history of this dark and demonic fighter, as well as speculate where he might go next as we cover the full story of Akuma leading in to Street Fighter 6. Akuma's story begins even before the events of Street Fighter 1. His original name is Goki, and he and his older brother Goken trained together under their master, Gotetsu. Though it isn't his main style, Gotetsu is known for being one of the few able to use the art of Satsui no Hado, a form of ki centered around the concept of growing stronger via killing, without being overwhelmed or consumed by it. Goki is heavily drawn to this darker art and eventually winds up devoting himself to it entirely, while Goken rejects the style entirely and ventures into the opposite direction to develop the power of nothingness. Goki's ultimate goal becomes to shed his humanity, and thus the limits it brings in his pursuit of pure power, and become a devil or demon of sorts. He takes on the moniker Akuma, which translates to devil or demon of sorts, but this doesn't sit well with Gotetsu, and Akuma leaves to continue his training as he sees fit. Now he eventually returns to challenge and kill his master, and achieves this by using the Shun Goku Satsu, also known as the Raging Demon, a karmic technique that directly attacks the victim's soul based on the weight of sins committed during their life. He then takes Gotetsu's prayer beads as a declaration that he is the new top dog when it comes to the Satsui no Hado. Now Goken also returns some short time later and berates his brother for his actions and for his life path, but Akuma ignores the harsh words and casually walks away, not hearing any of it. Years later, Akuma once again meets up with his brother while the latter is in the midst of his training of both Ryu and Ken. The siblings clash in an epic fight that sees Goken as the winner and leaves Akuma feeling like a worthless, idiot loser who can't even do Satsui no Hado right. He requests that his brother kill him right there on the spot, but Goken does not oblige, and so Akuma leaves with new motivation to train even harder than before. And that leads us into the events of Street Fighter Alpha. At this point, Akuma is really only interested in finding worthy foes whom he can use his full power in battle against. He throws down with Gen and lands a Raging Demon, but Gen is able to survive because he empties his soul and thus leaves no fuel for the attack to run on. The evil fighter chooses not to finish off Gen after he realizes that the old Chinese warrior is disadvantaged with leukemia, further revealing Akuma's personal code of conduct. He later fights Ryu on the island on which he's been living, called Gogento, and he sees much potential in him once he observes that Street Fighter's poster boy is wrestling with the Satsui no Hado himself. Akuma decides not to kill Ryu, but instead allows him to continue training in the hopes that he'll travel a similar path to Akuma's own, achieve a similar level of power, and wind up a worthy rival. He warns Ryu, however, that if he doesn't embrace the Satsui no Hado, he'll straight up murder him. Akuma then destroys the island with a single attack and leaves. The increasingly evil character then has a brief run-in with Adon, but defeats him easily, deems him an unworthy opponent, and lets him live. While seeking out M. Bison, Akuma encounters Guy, and the two of them fight until they realize they're both gunning for the same evil dictator, at which point they simply stop. In Street Fighter II, Akuma does not enter the World Warrior Tournament officially, but instead decides to watch from the shadows to see if any worthy foes emerge. This was the character's first actual appearance, as he guest starred as a secret boss, but the well-known storyline in which Akuma sneak attacks M. Bison during the finals with a Raging Demon out of nowhere is actually non-canonical, and actually Akuma doesn't play too much of a role in the official story here, as we don't really know what happens with him. Street Fighter IV isn't too different, though we do see him battling with his brother Goken over Ryu's KO'd body. And by the way, Capcom retconned Goken's story to say that he wasn't killed, but instead put into a deep coma that he eventually woke up from so he could be in Street Fighter IV. Akuma refers to Ryu as the Cub when they're about to battle, perhaps nodding to the idea that he and his brother represent outside forces trying to influence Ryu's path. We don't see the outcome of this battle, but we have to assume it didn't go too well for Akuma, as Ryu is able to continue on his journey afterwards. Akuma doesn't play much of a role in Street Fighter V's narrative either, except for in the prequel snapshot stories. In his, he faces off with Gen once again and seemingly kills the old man after being told he has ironically stunted his own growth by shedding parts of his humanity. Akuma also has a run-in with Kage, the evil side of Ryu that split from his being after the main protagonist finally conquered the Satsui no Hado. The two battle and Akuma eventually fends him off, though doesn't defeat him entirely. In Street Fighter 3, there still isn't a ton of direct story influence, but it does seem like developers use this game to simply articulate just how powerful Akuma has become through a handful of examples. He defeats big bad guy Gil with a raging demon, although Gil does resurrect himself after Akuma leaves. He also goes toe-to-toe with Oro, who is arguably the strongest character in the entire Street Fighter universe, in a fight that ends in a draw as the two realize they're a perfect match for one another and that seeing the contest go to his natural end would result in mutual death. We also see him destroy a submarine near the ocean floor during his ending, giving us yet another idea of his immense power. Akuma rarely takes center stage, but instead stands as both an influence on main protagonist Ryu, as well as a representation of what happens when one fails to acknowledge the sacredness of human life. They are surely to be viewed no longer as peers by their society, but as monsters or demons, and thusly be ostracized and cast out of it. He hasn't actually shed his humanity completely, though this was non-canonically explored through his transformation into Oni in Street Fighter 4, but seeks to use Ryu, whom he selfishly views only as a tool, to achieve this. He's not quite the devil on Ryu's shoulder, but maybe more specifically a thread of Ryu's or anyone's personality that would benefit should he embrace said devil. So what might Capcom do with Akuma in Street Fighter 6? Well, it seems like a great time for the conclusion of that battle set up way back in Alpha. Ryu fully rejected the Satsui no Hado in the events of Street Fighter V and seems to have reached his most powerful form. Akuma promised to kill Ryu if he pulled some shit like this, and so it only seems right that they'd finally throw down for the rematch. Only, how much does this fight actually matter anymore? The role Akuma played in Ryu's story has become fairly antiquated given that Ryu has surpassed that particular struggle. And don't get me wrong, it'd be awesome to see the most powerful yet forms of both characters clash in a Michael Bay explosions are the meat of the content kind of way, but Capcom could also update the relationship for modern problems. If they continue with the idea of a new, potentially world-ending threat that they started toward the end of Street Fighter V, then perhaps we see a temporary and begrudging alliance form in an enemy of my enemy sort of scenario. I can't say I'd ever want to see Akuma fully go away from who he is as a power-crazy fighter, but he's honestly been fairly one-dimensional and predictable for a long time now. What exactly would this alliance look like, and how far would it go before inevitably breaking? This makes for some interesting storylines. Alternatively, and as I mentioned in my full story of Ryu leading into Street Fighter 6, which you should definitely check out if you haven't already, it might be interesting if Ryu and Akuma had their showdown, but Kage was also thrown into the mix. Kage represents the side of Ryu that Akuma always hoped would see manifest, and if Capcom wanted to continue Ryu's struggle with his evil self, just from without instead of from within, it could make for an interesting interaction between the three characters. Maybe Akuma and Kage team up to form an especially formidable opposition, or maybe Akuma realizes through Kage's ultimate weakness that the Satsui no Hado isn't as worthy of pursuing as he previously thought. Whatever they do with Akuma, I'd hope it adds a bit of another dimension to his character, as the one he's been operating in has always been fun and enticing enough, but does admittedly feel kinda tired at this point. Regardless of his story direction, you can bet that Akuma will be a matter-of-fact high tier, probably join the game sometime after launch, and be a badass about whatever it is he ends up doing. Feel free to share your thoughts on what you'd hope to see from Akuma in Street Fighter 6 in the comments. I've been John Velociraptor Guerrero for EventHubs. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.